kick it off. If there was a moment or an occasion or an event that caused the time travels to start.
I think it was something that the BBC Scotland realised had been missing, and was something that covered Scottish history. And the thing is that Scottish history, for a long time, has had the BBC. And by BBC I mean Burns, Bannockburn, and Culloden, right? That's all it ever looks at, and perhaps, oh look, Mary Queen of Scots. But there's an awful lot more, and to examine that and to really get under the skin of it, I think that's why the decision was made. And also, we have in our universities, we have an absolute jam-packed full of amazing young researchers who are turning out amazing work about our past. And it's about time that we spoke to them more. And you find out all these fascinating stories that are just here in this little country of ours. I mean, we know we've got a lot of history in Scotland. We've got loads of history in Scotland. In fact, we've got so much history in Scotland, we could sell it to other people. And we do. It's called Outlander. Have you ever seen Outlander? Very strange. There's an American lady who falls through time and space and meets a Jacobite who apparently spends a lot of his time running around the Heather taking his shirt off. Now, everybody knows that in Scotland you do not remove a single item of clothing unless you possibly have to. So where she got this notion from, I don't know. But it means that the world now looks at Scottish history and thinks that it's got a buy-in, which is really odd. And then when you start to scratch the surface of our story, you find such riches. The stories are amazing. We're really proud of the stories that we've covered in Time Travels. And also the historians that we bring out.
Which are the ones that's kind of stood out for a certain reason? Or
what stays with you? What stays with me? Lots of them. So what's really interesting about Time Travels as well is the fact that the BBC Scotland didn't choose a historian to present it. It chose a stand-up comedian, and which is interesting. Louise Yeoman and I have been making programmes for the BBC, for BBC Radio, since 2010, I think it was. And we had developed a bit of a reputation because Louise is just great for finding offbeat stories. And we covered mainly women's history. When we go digging, you find there's just a breadth of, like there is hardly, take for example, there's hardly a bit of dirt on this planet where a Scotsman hasn't pitched up and gone, you're using this place, I could do somewhere. There's hardly, the wealth of Scottish women's history is extraordinary. And the fact that we don't address it properly. And people say, well, does that matter? Yeah, well, it does actually, because if you don't know who you were, you don't know who you became, so you don't know what led to this. So the current debate around slavery is really interesting, because when we were being brought up, we had a view that the Scots were on the side of the angels. Oh yes, we were very, very, we were into emancipation, and we had the Emancipation Leagues, which is true, and that the Scottish working class people were hugely enthusiastic supporters of the emancipation movement. But then when you scratch a little bit further, you go, why is St Vincent Street called St Vincent Street? Where did all this money come from? Who were the Glassfords? Where are all those huge big houses down in Ayr and the Ayrshire and up in Perthshire? Who built them? Where did they get their money from? And then you start to slowly unpick our involvement in the slave trade. Being very Scottish, of course, our involvement was, well, we won't actually ship the slaves. But what we'll do is we'll buy them and we'll put them onto plantations. So it's uncovering that half of our story is vital, because you don't understand the bravery of the people that fought for emancipation without understanding the forces they were against. And this is why our history has to be examined more closely, and we have to look at these stories, because these hidden stories, or they have been hidden, forgotten, neglected, tell us something more about ourselves as a nation.
Was it a purposeful thing to have it quite gendered? Because when I was looking at the clips, there is a lot of female history, which is excellent.
Oh, absolutely. So the absolute credit for this has to go to Dr. Louise Yeoman. She's the producer. and she is wonderful. So it's things like, looking at the witchcraft trials, the witch hunt in Scotland, which we just took to it like, bang, this is a great idea, and just some like, well, let's do it. I mean, the Scots are amazing, actually, because we look at everything in binge terms. Binge eat, binge drink. And have you ever been a Cayley, binge dance? Absolutely everything. And when it comes to things like the witch trials, oh my God, we went through it in a big way. And and then you start to look at the witch trials, and they tell you so much about the communities that they came from, and of what their lives were like, and the little snatches of superstition and the belief system that they lived in. So we've got young female historians, who are looking at that. Everybody knows about Mary Stopes, but in fact, by the 1920s, which is an amazing era for women's history, because you've got all these women wearing flat shoes and going, "Well, shall we do something about this?" And they do it, and they're really powerful women. And birth control becomes a huge issue. It becomes a really important issue. And if you look at the letters that are written or the reports that are written by the early pioneers of birth control, you see why. So, for example, in Aberdeen, you have a birth control clinic set up in 1926. And one of the women who comes for help has 8 children, but she's buried 4. And she's in abject poverty, but she's still paying for the funeral of the last child. So the circle is going on and on and on and on. If you go down to the Wellcome Trust in London, they've got the letters written to Mary Stopes, who, by the way, manages to fall out with every single human being on the planet, including her own son. The letters written to her would break your heart. We read some of the letters from Glasgow. So birth control actually shaped Scottish history in the 20th century in a sneaky way that very few people had looked at until our female historians started. There are male historians who are looking at it as well, but when women started to tease this story out, you start to find other stories in there about the poverty that's driving these women to come and look for help. Social reform becomes a huge thing, building new houses, council houses. The people of the 20s could teach us a lot about welfare and kindness. They're on the dawn of creating the welfare system, and people who are educated and have money and time have started to look at the conditions of the poor, the urban poor, and the rural poor, so I should say, and have begun to ask questions like, why are people living like this? And can we not do something better? Why is there not running water? And you see a lot of this happening in the 20s. And of course, it all feeds into things like the Beveridge Report that comes later, that's the foundations for the welfare state. And there are actually some people who suggest the reason that male politicians, become so energised is because they've come from the trenches of the First World War. And so for the very first time, they've served alongside working class men. And the other thing is the empire has lost battalions on the battlefields of France and has to replace them. And the other thing that shocks people in the First World War is just how appallingly ill most of the men are when they get to the front. Never mind getting shot at by the Germans. I mean, these guys have got TB, they've got rickets, they've got and they're all diseases of poverty. And so these politicians come out of the First World War and the Spanish flu, that forgotten episode in world history,
yes,
which is suddenly hitting the headlines again. And they have views about housing, education, water, health, all of the 5 great evils that Beveridge decides to take down, they see in its rawest form in the First World War. So I think in the 20s, the state starts to realise it has a responsibility, not a charitable responsibility. This is when the swing away from the charity hospitals and we need to do something better than this. You didn't make it up. That's the extraordinary thing about history. People, you're like, you couldn't make it up. You go, what? And discover these truths.
What do you think time travel's gift is, or what do you think it does, or how do you think it helps with like public engagement, etc., and getting that in?
Oh, okay. So I think it's twofold. One is that we introduce Scotland to new stories about their past, and I think that's really important. And that's one of the things that drives the History Festival as well, is news stories. When I say, uncovering news stories about our past. But from the point of view of public engagement, it is really, really important, because history doesn't have the same platform as the things like the science festivals, which are great, and I do love a science festival, and they're brilliant, and I really enjoy them. But history tends not to. It gets a look in at things like book festivals and stuff like that, but it needs an outlet. And Time Travels, thanks to Louise and her amazing work, has been fantastic at uncovering and getting voices out there from universities, which is where we have such great research going on. I mean, astonishing research. So I think that's a great thing, to get those stories out and to get those historians out. That's what I think. And for public engagement purposes, because it comes right back to the big question is, does that matter? Does it matter? You can see science goes, yeah, well, we have to deal with the public because we've got to fight pandemics and stuff like that. But historians, they're all busy talking about the 18th century. Why is it important that historians have a route to engage with the public? And I think it's vitally important, because if you don't tell your story, what happens is somebody else tells you the myth. And the myth can be very, very dangerous indeed. So unless you get out there and make it, this is the actual story, people can manipulate your past. And I think that's almost as dangerous as a pandemic. The interesting thing about COVID, when it comes to scientists, to public engagement, is this has accidentally been the biggest public engagement exercise for science in history, outside of the Second World War. Suddenly people needed to know stuff. What's a virus? What's RNA? How does the vaccine work? Is it safe? What's AstraZeneca? So, which sounds quite frankly like a car. And the Bright Club was a great introduction to me to the madness of academia, and how public engagement is so difficult for the universities. And it's not entirely their fault. It's not their fault, actually. It's just finding vehicles to get the word out there. And the Bright Club is a great sort of vehicle for that.
And of course, where a lot of the fodder, Bright Club fodder, came from was doctorates, doctorate students.
Yeah.
And
my research isn't funny, and within about 5 minutes, I'm literally rolling around the floor going, "You do what?" And it's seriously, because I think perhaps you guys are too close to your subject sometimes, and you don't see it. I mean, and some of the other stuff that comes out of Bright Club is things like the public doesn't know how research happens. They don't know. Somebody just appears. A report today says that. Well, what was behind that? And this is one of the lovely things about Bright Club are people telling how they got their research. The thing about all of these public engagement things is that, and 3MT is a really good example, is increasingly you can't be an academic working in isolation. The increasing platforms for things like 3MT are absolutely are really important, because it means that the information gets out there one way or another. The other thing is it's good for the researcher, because I know an awful lot of people are shy, and I've been told that speaking in public is it the second most terrifying thing? Is it the second? Something like that.
I'm not sure. Well, say that again. Just say it confidently. We'll get fact check.
I've been told that speaking in public is the second most terrifying. I've been told that the people who'd rather die than speak in public, right? And I'm like, I'm going to microphone now. There have been times, Eddie, when I've had to restrain myself from crashing up to the microphone on an LNER train and saying, "Just give me that. I'll do the announcements about the hot drinks on the buffet. You go check the tickets. That's disgraceful. That's rubbish, that is." So the ability to speak in public is absolutely crucial. And it's a fear that has to be challenged. Here's the answer. What's speaking in public? Well, speaking in public is Bright Club, GMT, Cambridge James Ideas. It's presenting at a conference. It's taking a tutorial. It's also being interviewed for a job. We live in a world where you cannot live as a hermit anymore. And so the ability to communicate is absolutely crucial. And things like 3MT will get you to that point where you can communicate. Communicating accurately is becoming utterly crucial, because all you have to look at on Facebook at the morass of misinformation that's going out there. And it's incumbent on more and more people, especially researchers, to counter this accurately. And using your hands a lot while she's talking, vital. It's really important that the people who actually know, who actually do the research, are heard accurately, heard clearly. And it's things like 3-minute thesis that train you to do that. You will have noticed that I'm a terrible rambler. What these things do is you need the discipline of getting your point over clearly and succinctly, and that's what it does. Rallying cry.
Susan Morrison, thank you so much for giving of your time for this interview. It's been an absolute pleasure to wander through so many different subjects and discuss so much with you. Thanks you so much indeed.
Oh no, can I thank you on behalf of my family, Eddie? I haven't had anyone to speak to for months because they don't let me out of this room. Come back! I want to talk to you about the Great Plague! Come back!